So we have this 20+ acre field that we've planted with over 700 individual nut trees. And the type of nut trees that we were planting range from black and English walnuts, hazelnuts, and to chestnut trees. And all of these trees have some commercial viability, and we're going to talk about that today. So when it comes to nut trees, there's two types of income that you can derive from them. And I'll be honest, neither of them are very short-term investments. And you're looking at a minimum of probably 7 to 10 years if your income source is going to be nuts. And if you're planting these trees like black walnuts in order to get timber products, chances are you're planting them for your grandchildren, because you're looking at 60 to 80 and even beyond that years to maturity. Now the black walnut are interesting. Highly valued lumber products are made from black walnut, and it fetches an incredible price. According to one study, a 60-year-old stand of black walnut is worth around $120,000 per acre, which is kind of hard to believe, and maybe depends on a lot of different factors such as wood quality, but that's what the one study found. So there's definitely potential for producing high value products on your property using black walnut. The other idea, or the other source of income that you can get from nut trees, is the nuts themselves. So hazelnuts, I would say, would be the most prolific producer, and they're also the quickest to produce a crop, looking at about 7 years. We've planted about 50 of them on the farm. We haven't got any hazelnuts yet, but we're just entering our 6th season, and we're going to show you how the hazelnuts are progressing right now, and they look like they're going to be producing nuts this year. And finally, on the farm, we also have a number of chestnut trees planted. And chestnuts are a great tree. They produce a tremendous amount of crop, but it takes 10 to 12 years to really get them established. And we're pushing it in terms of the northern extent of the trees here in Nova Scotia. But nonetheless, we're interested in chestnuts for more than just the crop reason, but also for the preservation of the American chestnut. Some of you may not know, but the American chestnut was once the dominant tree species in much of North America. And the accidental introduction of what was known as the European chestnut blight about 100 years ago led to a rapid decline and almost total elimination of American chestnuts in America's forests. So researchers have found that about 1% of all naturally occurring American chestnuts do in fact have a natural immunity to this chestnut blight. So what researchers and farmers and conservationists have been trying to do is to propagate these disease-resistant varieties and begin to restore some of those old chestnut forests. So it's a long-term project, probably not much of a commercial venture, but still something we're really interested in pursuing here on the farm. So here is a black walnut planted about 10 years ago. It suffered some damage in a winter storm a few years ago and lost its main leading branch going up. But it continues to thrive, and it's growing, and new branch is kind of taking on that role of the lead. And it's not going to be a lumber tree by any means. It only goes up about 4 feet before it starts to branch off. But that's all right, because what we're hoping to produce with this is nuts. And last couple of years, we got about 200 nuts a year off them. And this thing is only beginning to reach anything close to its peak production. Probably won't peak until it's about 20 years of age. And then we have a couple more here. This one's probably 8 years old. And then this one here, another black walnut. Really nice looking trees, and they have a nice broad leaf, creates a lot of shade. And And we should get a few nuts off this one next year. And then down a little further, there's another black walnut that suffered damage last year. So these trees can get damaged in the wind, especially when they're planted in fields, because there's the denser canopy you plant them in, now provided you don't want to choke them out of sunlight completely, the more likely you're going to get that tree trunk developing straight up. So if you were planting these for future lumber harvesting, you may want to reconsider planting them in open spaces like this. Here's another black walnut. This tree's getting up to about 14 feet high probably. This one should be producing nuts this year. It's probably 10 years old right now. And here is the Hazelnut Orchard. 50 of them planted here. Sorry about the wind. It's really hard to find a day out here where it isn't windy. But these are called Catkins. And basically those are what pollinate hazelnuts and end up producing the actual nuts themselves. So this is the first year that we've seen any abundance of catkins, and this is their 6th year. And these are all varieties of hazelnuts from Ontario that are used in commercial production. And these actually are supposed to produce a nut that's nice and round, tasty, with a thin shell. And these are actually the type of cultivars that produce a nut that is accepted by Ferrero Rocher, which has a large processing facility in Brantford, Ontario. And they're actually probably the single largest buyer of hazelnuts in Canada for sure, and maybe even North America. So these shrubs are 4 to 6 years old. Some of them are doing better than others. Some we've had to replant because they died. But what we're hoping to do this year is we're going to start cloning some of these. As you see, they come up from the bottom, what's known as suckers. And you can actually do a variety of cloning techniques, especially on these young, really thin ones. You pile some soil around them and you scratch the bark, and it may root out, and then you can cut that sucker off and plant the new tree that should be the exact clone of this one. Here's some butternuts we're propagating. Started these from seed from one of the trees my father planted about 20 years ago. So these have been in this garden bed since April 2019. And at the end of the last 2 growing seasons, I use a pitchfork once they're dormant, so in November. And I pitchfork them out of the soil, loosen them, and then I replant them. And all that does is it just kind of resets the roots so that we're able to remove the tree beginning of the 3rd year, and then we put them in pots, and then they're sold after that. Or we may plant them along the farm somewhere. We haven't quite decided. But I pruned all of these after the 1st year just to promote them growing nice and straight instead of branching out too early. And this seems to be a good spot to grow trees. Kind of got overtaken by weeds, but it's on a northwestern slope, so it doesn't get full sun. Great spot to germinate things.